my connection is through my paycheck, my connection is through my work product. Like, how come it has to be something more than that?
I think true champion leaders, the ones, the kind that we all want to work for, that we think about 20 years later, I think they're masters at it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Leadwell podcast, the podcast where we interview mission-driven leaders who are doing it well. And we ask them what they're doing and how they're doing it so that you can lead your business and your people well. And today with me, I have my friend, Megan Billnoske. So here's the thing. Megan is president-elect for the National Speaker Association here in Houston. She is a consultant, a trainer, a coach, a phenomenal human being, a business owner. And Megan, wherever you are, you just tend to lead where you are and you help other people do it. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And thanks for such a warm introduction.
My absolute pleasure. I think it really helps establish the connection with the audience and you and me. And I'm totally riffing on the fact that that's what we're talking about today, right? We're going to talk about connection and connection for leaders. So you and I have a fun connection. Like, we got connected first through work, through a mutual friend. And then we've kind of taking it from there, right? We got to do some more work together with the same client. We've had some lunch together, all of those fun things. What else would you add to it or start telling us about that important of really a foundation of connection?
Well, I think it's something that happens everywhere, kind of like you shared about how we've got connected. And the circles that come from each connection are impressive. Like, we've got mutual friends that they asked you, how do you know Megan? And you said,
Yeah.
how do you know Megan? So it's amazing to me that connection is something people seek. And then as a leader, it's really important, because if you're not connected to your people, your supervisor, your purpose, I think it just ripples into everything that you're touching.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And when you said, like, let's talk about connection, I immediately started thinking about, yeah, how important, because we're talking about like the leader and the team member relationship, right? And this is somebody who I come to work with for. I spend, a third or more of my life kind of engaging in and around this. And so you started talking about some of those things, but on it, like, tell us, why is that important? Why isn't it just I come and I do what I'm supposed to, and like my connection is through my paycheck, my connection is through my work product? Like, how come it has to be something more than that?
I think true champion leaders, the ones, the kind that we all want to work for, that we think about 20 years later, I think they're masters at it. And I don't think a connection to a paycheck is just enough for the right mindset. Because if you're really trying to lead people, you're really trying to connect with them, you care about them. I always looked at my teams as if they were, almost my kids, where I have to protect them. Like, my job is to protect you, make sure you're safe, you have what you need, fend off all the predators of whatever's going on in politics. And so I think when they have that connection, it's much deeper. And I think it ties into motivation, making it much easier to just lead well wherever you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. So I have to ask, the prompting for this being such an important thing? Is it come out of a good story or a bad story?
Oh, um, it's a blend if I'm thinking about it. So the connection, when you asked me, what do you want to talk about? And I thought, something that's so important is that connection. I think it's really hard. So you have, different models to understand disc, behavior through disc. What are the different styles? You have Hogan, you have Berkman, all trying to diagnose or figure out, how do I like to be connected with, and how do I connect with others by adjusting my style. Very much servant leadership, which I know you talk all
Mm-hmm.
about. And
Yeah.
so my story, gosh, I can't lie, most of my story in leadership are bad stories. So
Yeah.
there's a
Sadly, I mean, a lot of us have those, right? Yeah.
yeah, and I
So
think,
what's one that sticks out to you that was like, oh, this to me is the pinnacle or the precipice of, like, this is why I care so much about connecting.
okay, got it. Yeah, I love that you asked like the big one. I'm gonna go with the very first one. So I
All
graduated
right.
from Texas Tech in 2010, and I couldn't get a job. It was the recession. I was living with my parents here in Houston, and I thought, well, I'll just get some part-time jobs until I can get a professional one to help start paying my student loans. So I became a Texas Tech recruiter, loved it, drove the car around, recruiting, helping, just explain what college was like and how to apply. And after about a year and a half, I started thinking, I need to think bigger. I just don't feel like this is long term. Although I love it, I need the challenge. So within about a week, or after 10 months of waiting, right, a week of interviewing, we'll clarify that.
Yeah.
I landed an international oil and gas job, traveling and training all over the world. And I made
Wow.
34% of a pay raise. I finally got an apartment, moved out of my parents' house after 2 years. I mean, it was just amazing. And they just let me be me. Now, the point that ties into your question, though, is about 5 years after starting that job, right? It was my dream job, one of them. And I do think you can have more than one, but I had one early on. And I was asked to steal intellectual property from another company on
Mm.
behalf of my supervisor. And my supervisor was an executive. And so I thought, you've been to my house, you know my family. You came to my apartment when I was robbed. I've been to your family. I've been on a fantasy football draft teams. I'm an integral part of all of your projects. You bring me into executive meetings to help present. And in an instant, that connection was completely broken. And quite
Yeah.
frankly, there's no going back because I would never have trusted that you won't just be as open as you were when you told me about this project. And for clarity, I also said, after he explained what the project was, I said, "So you mean steal?" And he said, "Yeah." So there is no
Mm.
ambiguity. There is no story I told myself. This is what happened. And so I
Yeah.
think the power of connection there, I was probably the most dedicated employee, or one of them there. I traveled, I supported that entire company, built things. I
Mm.
brought in learning management systems. Like I was on the move, building SharePoint
Yeah.
sites. And in an instant, all of it was, I went home, I started fixing my resume, and I thought, it's over. It's time to go because I don't respect it and I don't trust anymore. And so that connection piece, I think, is tied in heavily to trust. And if you
Mhm.
have an engaged team, or a direct report or a supervisor, if you're engaged, you have that trust. And I would have done anything for that company.
Yeah.
And it was all over.
In an instant,
Hmm.
because of the break of the connection and the trust and the respect that you had. Corey Shear, who's a good friend of mine, wrote a book about trust, and he says trust in the belief that something is true. And like as I'm sitting here listening to what you just said, I'm like, oh, you and I now both believe 100% that that person's going to ask you to do that again,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
Oh man, okay.
Yeah, I still get
So
goosebumps. You see that? That was
yeah,
years
right,
ago.
yeah, yeah. Extreme example, and still you've laid up kind of breadcrumbs for all of us around this connection piece. So maybe my natural bend is I'm a people and I'm really good at doing that connection. Maybe I'm not, right? Maybe I'm really high kind of drive and you brought up disc, right? Maybe I'm a high D and I'm more of the get it done, not the let's do it together type of person. So start laying out for us just what are some of those things that I can do as a leader to help build that positive connection between myself, my team to the work, all of those things. What are some things I could do?
I think it starts with your intention and what you're wanting to do with your group or your peers, your team. Because if you have the right intention that you want to lead well or have a connection, then that's the one intention that'll set you down a path to figure out how do I do that. If you're doing it for a reason just because it'll make your company more money, it's going to come through. So recognizing you need the right intention, the true intention of wanting to connect with them on for a real level. And then after that, I think it comes with how do you do that? Some things I've seen in companies that I've worked across Houston are how do you ask, what's there was one company I worked for, and it was a sheet that you filled out when you got hired, and it was all about your favorites. How do you like to receive recognition? How do you like to be appreciated? What's your favorite candy bar? What's your favorite sports team? So I think the connection comes sometimes with understanding that people are people. And at work, a lot of times we just see, well, your job is this, and I need this from you. And we forget that you have a grandma that's about to pass away from cancer, or you have a pet that just got lost and you're really upset. The human aspect, I think, is most important for that connection first. Whether you fill out a form or you just take your team to lunch, or if it's a one on one, just asking people about, hey, how's your home life? How's your family? And if they don't have children, they still have a family somehow. Or if it's friends, knowing what's important to them is really a huge piece of starting that connection because then people feel like you care. And if you're a disc style D, like you talked about, like get it done, moving through it, think of it as in order to get things done, you need to make that connection. So you are working on getting it done, but you have to take that first step first before you can move into execution, if you will. So I think the mindset's first, and then figuring out how do you start that human side? How do you start caring about them? And by the way, there was a team I had of 5 people, and I'm looking at my monitor over here because I had a sticky note for all of them because I'm not great at memory. Sometimes I forget, and I feel like it's worse to say, "Oh, you told me your husband's name was Joe," and I actually called him John, and now I feel like I'm even like negative points because I called him the wrong name, so I really wasn't listening. And so I had sticky notes up on my monitor that had all their names on them and then what their priorities were for their career and their family, their names, because I didn't want to miss it, mistake it. And a lot of times we had Zoom meetings so I could reference it because I care. So work with whatever your style is. If it's like mine, I'm not good with names until I see them written down because I'm a visual
Mm.
learner. So how do I write them down so I can remember them, the sticky notes? And then after that, I think it grows into wanting, we have 5 generations in the workplace. And a lot of people are talking about how each generation wants different things from work. I think they all want to feel connected to their job, but I think that looks different for different ones, right? Some people want a pat on the back, while other generations say it's your job. You don't deserve a pat on the back, it's your job. So you have different views of it. But that connection part still is your job as a leader to help them see what are they a part of. Can I tell you a story that's one of my favorites to
Please.
share in training? Okay.
Yes. Let's hear it.
Yeah. So I read it, I think it was in a book a while back, and it was about JFK, our president, and how he was walking through the halls of NASA here in Houston. And he comes across a gentleman that's sweeping the floor, and he's just sweeping right back and forth, minding his own business. And the president of the United States walking by, and JFK says, "Sir, what's your job here? What do you do?" And he said proudly, he stopped sweeping and he put his hands on his hips and he said, "I put a man on the moon."
Hmm.
And I don't think you can get that kind of dedication from an employee, motivation, heart, passion. I don't think you get any of that without connecting with your people, however it works for you and them, because that's the struggle of the connection. It looks different. I always say leadership is an art, it's not a science.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
have to create it with different people. But that's a few things you can do to start with a connection mindset, care about them as humans, and then connect them to the purpose of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. A mindset approach of I want to do this, really connecting, getting clear on some of the things that are important to them, and engaging in that way. And then, man, that moon one is so remarkable. Like how great! Every single one of us are sitting here thinking, like whether I'm in a financial institution, a school, or whatever. Like, don't we want everyone to say, "I put a man on the moon"? Right? I get kids to do X, Y, Z, or we provide the opportunity to allow people to build their financial futures, like whatever that might be. How wonderful! So if I take those steps as a leader, and I'm doing those things, I have the intention of saying, it's a a person always. I want to be connected. I ascribe to the mantra like people don't care until they know how much you care, like that type of
Yeah.
idea. Now it's a one to one, right? I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, I can have that, and I probably have had that, and others have probably had it where it's like, oh, Megan and I have a great connection, Jason and I have a great connection, Sarah and I have a great connection, but Sarah, Jason, and Megan have never talked to each other, and they're on the same team. Like I am, in fact, the middle of this spider web. So, how can I then take this and start to make it more of a web instead of this line into me as a leader? How can I get the team connected with the team and build a little bit of that network effect, if you will?
I think what you're asking is the root of a high performing team.
Hmm.
The connection that you're talking about, once you grow that, I think the benefit is when those teams that we all want to be on, that's you don't mind working late to fix the problems, or you have good collaborative ideas or have conflict and it's okay to start that. I had a team when I worked at an international company, not the one I mentioned earlier, but another one. And my team was in Brazil, the UK, Florida, and Houston. So I had 5 people total. It was actually the same one I had the sticky notes up there for. So same group.
I would need the sticky notes too if I'm working across time zone, continents, all of
That's
that,
exactly
right? Like
it.
I just have to be like, it is I need the clocks on the wall. Like, here's what time it is in Brazil. Here's what time it
With
is
their
in the
photos
UK.
next to it, like, okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, with that team, COVID had hit. The
Mm,
entire department of 45 people globally for our training and development group had, I would call it a reorg. And so all the training managers, there's four of us, we all had divisions of the company and they rotated and flipped for some of us. And so we got new teams. So imagine this. I started working there in November of 2019. I am getting ready by January to go to Brazil for work, and I'm super excited to get to go back international. It's one of my favorites.
woo.
And then COVID hits in March. Everybody
Mm.
works from home. I don't know if you had this, but we had daytime pajamas and nighttime pajamas. Like everybody was just in pajamas for 3 months. It was so great. And then everybody was so depressed. Anyway, so that's March. COVID's hit, right? It's big, it's nasty, it's growing. There's death on the news. International teams, we started working about 24 hours a day.
Oh.
Australia was actually probably the biggest scenario of that because our company was American based, and so they have such a big time zone difference. They would have like very little time with their family, and then get back on for a, like all protocol of kind of boundaries for work kind of went out the window. My
Yeah.
team was
Okay.
working so much, and nobody could go anywhere at all. So you have death on the news, you have high work, you can't go anywhere, you can't get toilet paper, you can't get noodles. I mean, high stress. And I get a new team in May, and so I sat there and I thought, oh, wow. Well, I can tell them to take a break and they try. But when there's nothing on TV and your family's all home, everybody was working anyway to do something. And so while I did have connections, I always did one on ones with my teams, right? So there's you're
Hmm.
growing that connection piece that you talked about. But then to get them to mold together as a team, and the reason I'm bringing up this team is because this team was the highest performing team I've ever had. And this is
Mm.
how it started. So you need to know that. And with the reorg, I went from 2 people to 5. And so I had this opportunity to glue people together, get to know people that I didn't know, and then try and be productive in COVID downturn when the whole world says you can't have a business when you're working at home. You have to be in the office to make money as a company. And what I did was I started with my one on ones. I just got to know them. How's it going?
Hmm.
What your family members are. I told you I wrote down things. And then we would have bi weekly team meetings where everyone would be there. I always started off with some kind of question or icebreaker, or I would make sticky note games where they would, I'd have it here because it's virtual and they would tell me a number and I'd peel it off like Jeopardy and they'd have a question. So I started with the human side and then we would talk about business. But then in my one on ones, as time went by, projects kept going. And there was one person I can vividly remember. I did it with everyone, but this one affected me the most, which is probably why I feel it heavier or the best. He showed me his project plan. And we were working on developing things that he wanted to get into as a training manager. And so I said, how are we standing organized for this project? So he goes away and comes back at our next one on one with the project plan. This is what I found. This is great. This is how I'm organizing it. And I'm thinking, you just did this? Did you make
Hmm.
this from scratch? And he said, it's a template in Microsoft. And I just kind of edited it. And instead of me saying, I'd like to show this to the team, can you send it to me? The connection is him having the opportunity to share it with his team, not
Yeah.
me. And him standing in his, moment of shining to say, hey, here's what I'm doing, bringing them knowledge and also giving him an opportunity to connect with his team. Hey, here's how I'm going to
Hmm.
help you. And so I had him, I said, would you mind presenting this at our next team meeting? And he said, no, you can present it. And I said, no. I said, it's yours. Share what you think. Tell us about it. And then I had another meeting with another lady on our group and she had something similar and I said, this is brilliant, you're doing this out of Florida, why don't you share this with the team on our next team meeting? I did that with the Houston, Brazil, UK. And so as I got to know them, it was very authentic, and it wasn't just,
Hmm.
hey, just present something. It was, hey, show us what great work you're doing. And also I changed the team meetings based on a suggestion somebody gave me. And they said, we always do safety moments because in oil and gas, that's a thing. Every meeting starts with a safety moment. And he said, why don't we do a values moment about how we're living the values of the company? And I said, that's great. I said, would you like to lead that? And he said, yeah. And so just like the man in the moon story, when you get connect with your people, you really know what drives them, and then let them
Yeah.
fly like a bird. Put them in a position where you like the values that much. Great. You know what? We need that. So It's letting all your team shine together and massaging it on the outside to say, how do I put people in the right position to feel like they bring value? And that team, I'll tell you, we still talk on WhatsApp to this day. I still know
Yeah.
when people get new pets. I still know when people get new jobs. And so, you know, there's one more thing I want to share kind of in the middle of the COVID thing that I really think helped. And before I share it, I'm not saying that you need to do this now or all the time, but you use it
But
as,
maybe.
but I mean, I think they would like it. um, because of the environment, COVID, I told you there's work nonstop. People were not taking breaks. No vacation time was going on. We're getting into July now. We're getting into August, September. And I thought, okay, well, we're going to bump up. We did weekly team meetings. So we met more often every Friday on the right time zone. So nobody was working after hours. And I said, we're going to use my time to take a break since all of your time they were working. It's not like I
Mm.
needed to make sure that and manage like, what are you doing this week? They were sending me reports about stuff that was going on. That's plenty. But instead of routine meetings, I changed them to games. And guess what? I didn't have to make the games because there was a person on my team that loved them. And so, guess what I did? I said, hey, would you like to be our chief fun officer and come up with an activity every single? I want you to either use 20 to 30 minutes or the whole thing. Figure out a game that we can play as a team. And those games were hilarious. We played categories, we played um, all kinds of communication games. She made up games and it gave her so much energy. And it didn't make my workload any heavier, except to say, hey, I see your talent here. I understand how you can connect to our team and help us. Why don't you go use your skills? We also had on December for the holidays, I had an office wrapping, like decorating contest. So everybody, like what
Hmm.
your Zoom showed was a decorating competition. Somebody, she was awesome. Somebody in Houston, she's the one that won it. She decorated with she took wrapping paper and wrapped her entire office, the
Oh my goodness,
shelves. I
that is
mean,
hilarious.
and then our last meeting of the year, it was a onesie party or no, pajama party. I wore a onesie because Mrs. Potato Head onesie, and then I put a Toy Story background up with all the Toy Story characters, and I was Mrs. Potato Head.
Oh
Um,
my goodness.
so I think all of that to say, right intention, understand what your people are going through. Yes, we're here to do a job, but in that environment, I was very aware of how much stress and burnout was going on.
Mm.
And so make moves to change and try something. And I found out that that team had little mini meetings without me. And I
Yeah.
love that. I don't need to be in
Yeah.
all the meetings. I am connecting you so you understand who does what. You get along together and go forth and have mini meetings without me. I don't
Yeah.
mind. And
Yeah.
so I know it's a long
Yeah,
story, but
you probably even hope for it, honestly, right? Like,
yeah.
man, I think we get confused because we are always connected, right? Like in the terms of the
Yeah.
internet. So we're always connected. We think this is something that just exists when really it's probably a lot more like AOL. And one, it's good to have disconnection time, but two, it really takes that awkward like build up, but then we're on, we can be connected. But just like the internet, like trust or disempowerment or any of those things can drop it off. And when we approach connection as something that has to be created, has to be fostered, is an engagement, an intention, and a way to empower people, then we're going to build the type of team and the motivation and the values like you just created. Thank you so much for lining that out for us. So, Megan, I ask everybody that comes on, and you don't get to get away from this.
Okay, good.
So you got to let us know, what does it mean to you to lead well?
I think it means to lead where you are. If that's in a tough meeting, a crucial conversation of conflict, if that's with your family, and something's going on and you need to step in and take the lead, or if you're a new leader that took over a team that's dysfunctional and there's lots of friction. Or if you have a high performing team like the one I shared about and it's leading where you are, once that team moves into high performance, your job changes. How do you keep them going and how do you evolve? So I think lead where you are is really something that's it's open for interpretation of wherever you are. And I think leaders are all on their own journey at a different phase. And I think that's okay. But
Hmm.
you always have an opportunity to lead wherever that is.
Awesome. And I love the heart of service, adaptation, self-awareness that really leads to serving people, the organization, and the work that you are doing. Megan, thank you for coming on, for connecting with me, and for being a
Yeah.
fun connection here in Houston. Maybe next time we rally all the troops, we're playing a game when we all get together. Never know. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And everybody else, make sure that you connect with Megan. You can find her on LinkedIn, and we will put her website and everything else in the show notes. Go check her out, follow her. She has a great newsletter that goes around for wherever she goes to tie it all back into leadership things. So check that out. And until next time, my friends, be well, God bless, and lead on.